Hello, this presentation is a short presentation on sentence starters versus sentence frames and how to support oral language acquisition in students who are developing academic oral English and Spanish in a dual language classroom. You'll be learning how to use sentence frames to impact student language development and to maximize transfer to writing. This presentation was originally created in April 2015 by Jadia Kirk for Blair Elementary School and has been adapted for our use. The goal of the presentation is to know the difference between a sentence starter and a supportive academic sentence frame. So what are sentence starters? They are phrases to engage more students in turn and talk. They are aids for students to help them feel more confident in sharing. They are a way to ensure students comprehend and can apply examples, reasoning, and evidence. For example, I feel petrified when. The student must understand and comprehend the word petrified in order to be able to answer that question. The student does not need to know the difference between petrify, petrified, was petrified. Just the fact that petrify or petrified and the meaning is sufficient for them to be able to use that sentence starter and talk about their feelings. The following example is, I like that you shared about the snail because. Here again, the student is going to be talking either about the qualities of the sharing and or the content of the sharing about the snail. So either way, they need to comprehend the word sharing or they need to comprehend snail. It's a starting point and focuses really on the word level of language. Teachers can often use sentence starters to help students make predictions like, I predict because. You must know what the word predict means in order to be able to use the sentence frame. Sentence starters are also important to use for answering questions. For example, what is a characteristic of a porous rock? A student might respond with a sentence starter, a characteristic of a porous rock is. Again, the student needs to know both the comprehension of the word porous, they need to know it's a rock, and they also need to understand the word characteristic. Here are some examples of some sentence starters. A sentence frame is very unique from a sentence starter. They are carefully constructed sentences with fill-in-the-blanks that specifically and explicitly teach syntax or sentence structure. That is, they help students to be able to build the complex ways that words are put together and how that grammar can influence the meaning of those individual words in relation to the other words. Sentence frames are used to teach students the language to accomplish tasks. Language here does not mean vocabulary, it actually means the functional language. Frames give students an academic language scaffold at a complexity that they cannot yet construct on their own socially. For example, it may support the language of comparing and contrasting, the language of summarization, language of inference, sequence, classifying, analyzing, justifying, and so many. Here are some examples of some sentence frames. One of the first things you might notice is the absence or lack of academic vocabulary. That's because sentence frames support the functional language to accomplish an academic task. For example, the task of comparing and contrasting. All of these sentence frames can be used with different vocabulary words within the domains to accomplish the same task. So let's have you try. Is it a starter or is it a frame? Number one, sentence starters are. Is that a sentence starter or a frame? If you said starter, you were right. Number two, blank are different from blank because blank. Is it a starter or a frame? If you said frame, you're correct. Number three, blank can be compared to blank because. Is it a starter or a frame? Yep, it's a frame. Number four, blank is an example of a sentence frame. Is it a starter or a frame? It's a starter. Number six, since blank, now blank. Yep, it's a frame. Because blank, I presume blank. Yep, that's a frame too. You can see the differences, the type of language being used. Whereas sentence starters are more apt to use a vocabulary word that is specific to the instruction or content being taught, the frame is less likely to use specific academic vocabulary of a specific content and more apt to use process type language. So when do you use a starter and when do you use a frame? Well, you would use a starter if you want to ensure comprehension of vocabulary words. If you'd like to give confidence and get kids started speaking. If you want to focus conversations, or if you want to build conversations with talk moves, like, ooh, I like your idea and I would like to add. You use a sentence frame when you want to support the rehearsal of complex language use to complete a task like comparing, predicting, inferring. When the goal is to transfer from oracy to literacy, you're probably going to need a sentence frame. You may not need only a sentence frame, you may also need to use sentence starters. So here's the application time. You're going to use a sentence strip to create, number 1, your own sentence starter that you will use tomorrow in a turn and talk or bilingual pair. 2, your own sentence frame that allows students to apply their new words to the task. Use the Academic Language Toolkit for support.